Greetings and welcome to another edition of If I Should Die Before I Wake. On this edition, we're going to be reacquainted with two friends of mine, Tamara and Alexander Netobar, who were leaders of the Rotary Club Kiev Sofia when I went to Ukraine for the first time in 2022. But before we get to that, I'd like to mention a few things that are going on with the Ukraine war. As of this recording, Vladimir Putin has already had his self-serving Victory Day parade in Red Square in Moscow. In attendance was President Xi of China and many other political leaders friendly to Russia. Let's remember the countries that are hostile to the United States and have aligned themselves with Vladimir Putin and Russia: China, North Korea, and Iran. These countries have supplied military aid and weapons to Russia in use against Ukraine, and let's not forget, North Korea and China have supplied soldiers to fight for Russia and Ukraine as well. It seems that the West is unable or unwilling to grasp that this war is much more than just about Ukraine. Regarding Putin's so-called three-day truce, Russian forces continue to operate all along the front, and also a Russian glide bomb struck the city of Sumy, killing a mother and wounding her son. Russian drones also struck the village of Orizhba, and another drone struck a village in the Kherson region where others were seriously wounded. Again, Vladimir Putin is a liar. He is a terrorist and he is a killer and is not to be trusted. Well, I'm having to update my video since several things have been happening since I started working on this video. First, top officials from France, the United Kingdom, Germany, and Poland all met in Ukraine over the weekend, and they presented a joint proposal on Saturday calling for a 30-day ceasefire with Russia to begin Monday, May 12th. This proposal follows Russia's 3-day ceasefire that expired on Saturday. The Kremlin counterproposed a face-to-face meeting between Ukrainian President Zelensky and Russian President Vladimir Putin on Thursday in Turkey. Zelensky immediately agreed and proposed a ceasefire to begin on Monday ahead of the peace talks, to which the Kremlin has spoken out against. The situation is fluid, so we will continue to pray for a just and lasting peace. In the meantime, there is a Russian ballistic missile air raid happening right now in Kyiv. On my first trip to Ukraine in June of 2022, I met Tamara and Alexander Netobar, a couple who are leaders in the Rotary Club Kiev Sofia. They were gracious enough to welcome me and invite me into their world to document their work with the Rotary Club in helping the victims of the war, and also to document the brutality of the Russian invasion. We took a trip to the northern part of Ukraine, to the Chernihiv region. It was where one of the main thrusts of the Russian invasion began. Not far outside of the Kyiv Oblast, we were confronted with an unexploded ordnance driven into the middle of the highway. It had been marked for later removal. As we drove further north, there were more and more reminders of the war. We saw destroyed Russian tanks and other vehicles. There were more and more damaged buildings and homes as we continued. Our first stop was an abandoned Russian ammunition base. The Ukrainian military had driven the Russians out earlier in the spring. We were permitted access to the base and allowed to stay within the cleared areas. There was unused ammunition scattered everywhere, destroyed barracks and vehicles. In one of the abandoned buildings were discarded documents and an empty vodka bottle on a desk. You could tell the Russians left in a hurry. Alexei, a digital creator who was part of our group, found a used cluster bomb shell and decided it would make a great lamp for his home. So we packed it into one of the cars and covered it so it would not be seen going through the checkpoints we drove through. I smile every time I think of and imagine Alexei's new lamp in his home. We made a stop at one of the World Central Kitchen hubs. You may have heard of the World Central Kitchen, which started in 2010 an organization dedicated to being the first to the front lines to provide food in situations of crisis and humanitarian hardship. They've served millions of meals for Ukrainian families caught between the choice of fleeing their homes or facing the ravages of war. Now they are focused on supporting frontline communities in eastern and southern Ukraine, where the need for food has become more urgent than ever. The hub near Chernihiv, where we stopped, was full of friendly and enthusiastic volunteers of all ages. It was an impressive operation designed to help and feed the hundreds of victims in the area. We loaded the vehicles with food and other supplies from the hub to take along with us for the people in the villages we visited. We came to the village of Kolachivka, a village unfortunately caught up in what was called the Siege of Chernihiv by the Russian forces in February of 2022. Russian forces repeatedly attacked the village of Kolachivka, trying to encircle the larger city of Chernihiv. But a valiant Ukrainian force repelled the Russian assault, but not before shattering the lives of so many. We were shown around by one of the locals who showed us the results of the war in the area, the damage to homes and businesses, the destroyed tanks and armored vehicles of the Russians. One burned up Russian armored vehicle still had the evidence of the soldiers who died inside. We were shown how the dam was destroyed by the residents and Ukrainian soldiers in order to flood the area, making it more difficult for the Russian vehicles to maneuver. We met some of the families who had lost everything. We were introduced to Tatiana and her family. They had survived the battle and occupation by living in their basement for weeks while their home was destroyed. We were introduced to her daughter, Anastasia, who was 12 years old at the time, and despite all that she had been through, she was still a smiling and curious girl and was excited to show us her improvised bedroom that her family had built her, complete with her pet cat. We came to the village of Ya'adin, and sadly, Ya'adin is famous for all the wrong reasons of the war. Early on, the village was occupied by Russian invaders who forced 367 residents into the basement of the school at gunpoint, and they were forced to stay there for nearly a month. The youngest of the group was 6 weeks old, and the oldest was 93. In a space of little more than a high school locker room, 367 people tried to survive with little air circulation, cramped condition, and with little or nothing to eat. 10 people died in that school basement due to the lack of oxygen. The village was liberated by the Ukrainian forces in April of 2022. Ya'adin still stands. The homes will eventually be rebuilt, businesses restored, and the kids still play at the site of their destroyed school, perhaps a reminder of some memories of what they once had before the Russians came. But for now, there is that basement, a reminder of the horrors of war, a memory for all who died there, and also a tribute to all who survived and the unbreakable spirit of the Ukrainian people. We will be back with part 2 of our trip to Chernihiv. In the meantime, please continue to pray for the strong, resilient, and courageous people of Ukraine and for a just and lasting peace. If you would like to help me in my missions to help and support Ukraine, please scan the QR code here or email me at jkirby1@me.com. And never forget, Slava Ukraini, Heroям Slava. Glory to Ukraine, glory to the heroes.